So when the ketogenic diet worked wonders for you personally,
Mhm.
how or when, or in fact, the how is even important too. So how did you then decide to implement that in your occupational therapy practice?
So it was obvious to me that I needed to read the research.
Mm.
I had not read very much of the research on ketones and what they were and how they work. So I did a deep dive into the research and found an incredible amount of research for neurological conditions. Of course, I'd worked with people with Parkinson's for my whole career. And what I discovered was we really don't have many alternative treatments for people with Parkinson's. We have medications which help the motor symptoms, but there's so much more to Parkinson's than motor symptoms. I like to use Dr. Matt Phillips in New Zealand. I like to use his illustration of the iceberg. I think it really shows that a lot of conditions have symptoms at the top of the iceberg. Yeah, there's tremor in Parkinson's and maybe some gait abnormalities. But then the largest part of the iceberg beneath the surface are things like metabolic health and insulin resistance and your diet and lifestyle. And then he also has that foundation of the iceberg, which is your mitochondrial health. I didn't know anything about mitochondria. So I have just been really diving into the research. Back in 2018, I knew some members on the board of the Colorado Parkinson Foundation. They were family friends. And I happened to be talking to a couple of them one day about health, and they said, you know, we're all falling apart. Our health is terrible. And at that point, I had been on the ketogenic diet since 2014. So 2014 to 18, I had seen the benefits and I had read the research and I taught them about the diet and they went on it and they all got better and they all got off meds and they all were just improving. And so the board of the Parkinson Foundation of Colorado got together and said, we want you to do research in Parkinson's disease using the ketogenic approach, and we will fund it. So since 2018, I have been doing studies for the foundation, and we have 5 published studies so far, and I'm recruiting for study number 6 right now that I'd love to tell you about.
Tell us about the
Oh,
studies. I'll put some of the links below in the
beautiful.
description, but tell us about the new one too.
Okay, wonderful. So, my other studies have been just using the diet, and we've been testing things like symptoms, metabolic health, all the metabolic health markers that we test, surveys on quality of life, anxiety, depression, right? So, the board really wanted me to do a crossover trial. I'd never done one. I thought crossover trials are great because you take the same group of people through the different interventions and you compare them to themselves. In essence, they become their own control group. So I am recruiting for a study. It is 8 weeks on the standard American diet. I do baseline and testing at 8 weeks. I test biomarkers, symptom scales. There's no intervention. They just do what they do. Phase 2 is 8 weeks on their regular diet, just adding daily MCT oil. And we're building up to Dr. Bruce Fife's protocol of 3 to 5 tablespoons a day. Now, that phase is based on some research by Stephen Cunnane, who is doing ketone research in neurodegeneration. And he's kind of settled on that 3 to 4 tablespoons a day of MCT to bring those ketones up. And he's seeing some amazing results, especially on things like cognition, response speed. His testing is a lot in Alzheimer's disease, but he's also having some good relevant research to Parkinson's. And then, of course, Dom D'Agostino has been testing ketones and their neuroprotective attributes. And so that really fits with that phase 2 that I'm doing now. The same group, phase 3, goes on a full blown 70, 20, 10, or 75, 25 ketogenic diet with the added MCT oil. And I do their testing before and after. Between each phase is a 4-week washout period because that's kind of what you do with crossover trials. And I'm excited about the results to see what does the same group do through these 3 different interventions. What are their health biomarkers like? What are their symptoms like? And we're targeting not only their Parkinson's symptoms, but sleep, fatigue, and cognition. So we're testing all of those things. All of those things are extremely huge in Parkinson's. Bless their hearts, they have horrible sleep. Their fatigue is off the charts. So this is the crossover trial that I'm recruiting for right now. I'm going to finish recruiting by May of 25, and then I hope to publish this. It would be great to publish this in our new Journal of Metabolic Health for the SMHP. So I'm hoping to publish in 26.
It'd be exciting to see it published. So let me just double check. So you're looking for people with diagnosed
Right.
Parkinson's disease, but at what
Exactly.
stages? Because you will have a variation,
Exactly. Oh, that's a good point. All stages.
all
I
stages.
want people in all stages. I have people who were just newly diagnosed in the study. I have people who are at stage 4 in the study. There are 5 stages. And as long as, and even in stage 5, even though they have some fairly significant swallowing problems at that point, we can make some adaptations in the ketogenic diet so that they can be able to comply with the diet. Obviously, things like steak are going to be a little hard for them, but there's so many alternatives for people to stay on the ketogenic diet and have the foods prepared in a way that they can chew and swallow them. So all stages, they do need the diagnosis, any age. And I have to always make the point that Parkinson's is not an older person's disease anymore. I've had people in my studies who were diagnosed in their 30s. So all ages, all stages.
So yeah, that makes sense because if a large proportion of global population
Right,
have some sort of metabolic disease, then, and we're seeing type 2 diabetics in teenagers.
right.
And so why wouldn't we see Parkinson's in 20 or 30-year-olds? It's no
Exactly.
longer even Alzheimer's now. People are saying, I mean, we're seeing Alzheimer's start, in 30-year-olds. And so I think it comes down to the metabolic sort of dysfunction.
Yes. I really believe the same thing. I'm so glad you brought up global statistics. I looked some up this morning, so I was current. So, worldwide, there are 10 million people living with Parkinson's disease. And in the US, nearly 90,000 people per year are diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, just 10 years ago in the US, there were only 50,000 people per year diagnosed with Parkinson's. So you can see that massive progression in the incidence of this disease. I believe, as you mentioned, that Parkinson's has metabolic origins. In fact, we're really finding out through this microbiome research that I have been doing that often neurodegeneration begins in the gut many years before you ever get your first symptom. And we know that the gut communicates with the brain. It's called the gut-brain axis, and that the abnormal proteins that are formed in the gut as a result of damaged microbiome actually end up in the brain. And so that connection tells me that if we could intervene as metabolic health practitioners years before, when people begin to have even GI symptoms, can we prevent neurodegeneration? It's a huge area of research. It's just exploded since 2022. I've only reviewed 60 studies so far, and that's just the beginning of really learning about how metabolic health affects neurological health.
So you've been talking about Parkinson's, but what other conditions do people have
Okay,
who may benefit from the ketogenic therapy?
exactly. So in my metabolic health practice that I do as a volunteer, I have women in their that are older than 50 who have metabolic syndrome and osteoporosis. I have women that have significant gut issues, celiac and irritable bowel and chronic colitis. I'm working with them as well. I have patients with cardiovascular disease, strokes, and other neurological conditions, MS. So I'm seeing really the wide variety, and my therapeutic intervention of choice is to first begin reducing the processed foods
Yeah.
in their diet and the sugars.
Mhm.
The next step would be incremental therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. So, I'm a type A person. I can go cold turkey, boom. But a lot of people really have to wean down slowly and be able to handle a full-blown ketogenic diet once they get there. I wanted to mention the beauty of the crossover trial I'm doing is that phase 2, they're taking in the MCT, they're building ketones.
Mhm.
And what they're finding is their appetite is more controlled. They don't have these sweet cravings. And by the time they get to the ketogenic diet, they're ready for it. They like, I don't even want that stuff. So that's what I do in my private practice. I begin by just adding, okay, let's take out the processed food and let's just add some daily MCT oil for a
Mm.
few weeks, see how you feel. And then incrementally, I build them up onto a lower carbohydrate diet. Now, I have ended up being a carnivore. I'm way over there.
Mhm.
And I think people find their sweet spot, if you will, in terms of how much carbohydrate they can take out. Now, I also have most of my people, I would say, also have type 2 diabetes.
Mhm.
It just follows with these other conditions. Quite a few of my patients with Parkinson's have type 2 diabetes, and I believe it's because that sugar, that glucose gives them a hit to their brain that it's not getting anymore. because their dopamine is so depleted. Dopamine's that feel good kind of motivation sort of neurochemical. So a lot of times their diabetes goes away while I'm working on their Parkinson's. That's the beauty of this approach. Now, some people are eating 50 to 80 grams of carbohydrates a day, and some are eating 10 grams. It just really depends on what we're working on and what your individualized carbohydrate tolerance is. And as a type 1, you know a lot about that.
Mhm. It's important you said that. This is why we cannot have a diet plan. These are your weekly meals. Here you go and stick. And it's just not
Exactly.
practical enough because it varies from person to person. Two questions now about that
Yeah.
study specifically. Now, MCT oil, why MCT oil specifically? Obviously, what about, I mean, obviously they're medium chain oils. Does it
Right.
have to be MCT oils? Also, instead of MCT oils, um, have you tried exogenous ketones, ketone supplements?
Oh, great question. So, why MCT oil? So, I give my patients a choice. MCT oil has more C8, C10 in it, and those are forms of medium chain triglycerides that translate to blood ketones more rapidly. Now, regular coconut oil that you buy at the grocery store, especially if it's cold pressed and unprocessed, has some C8, C10, but a lower amount. But some of my folks do just fine on it.
Yeah.
Now, the coconut oil has that coconut taste. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people can't afford the MCT oil. I get it. It is a little higher priced, but I kind of give them a choice. And the reason I do that is I provide my research participants with a Keto Mojo blood glucose and ketone meter, and they test every morning and it's uploaded to my portal. And based on what I see their ketone levels doing, then we adjust their intake of the MCT oil. Some of them who are just doing plain old coconut oil are getting into nutritional ketosis and are able to maintain it. It really depends on so many factors. One is the state of your microbiome. Do you have a healthy enough gut that can convert the MCT or the coconut oil into the needed ketones? Is MCT oil causing you to have diarrhea where coconut oil may not, or vice versa? So I love what you said about individualizing and customizing because everyone is so different. We are uniquely made. And so we can adjust the diet. I can adjust the MCT oil or coconut oil, depending upon what their blood is showing me every morning. So that's another way. I'm a big proponent of testing. And of course, in your world, testing is essential.
There's the affordability element too. And
Right.
for example, exogenous ketones, which we'll come to because
Oh,
I asked why not exogenous ketones. They're a
right.
lot more expensive, for example.
Which is precisely why I don't use them. And so I'm one of these practitioners that I want to do the most natural approaches where they live. If they can go to the grocery store and pick up what they need, I'm all about that. I have been contacted by companies who make the exogenous ketones, and I have tried some myself. They're quite expensive. Most of my patients can't even afford the meat that I'm asking them to buy for their diets, and they don't taste great. They really don't. And I just want to give them something simple, something accessible. I'm all about accessibility and something that they feel like they can afford. So you're right. I don't use the exogenous for that reason. Now, I'm not saying that exogenous ketones aren't valuable. They are. And if you're trying to keep your ketones up to control seizures, then by all means, if that's the way you do it, I think that's wonderful. And I'm so glad the companies are making them, and there's a lot of research being done in them. I love Stephen Cunane's work purely because he's using natural stuff and he's using MCT oil to test and he's finding some significant results. So I want to use the most natural approaches I can. So thank you for asking me about that.